Hi there, it's Kathy. Hope you guys are doing well. We are approximately in week 5 to 6, and you probably have just finished reading Module 3 on human resource development. And so this module is not a very hard module per se, but as you saw, there's a lot of theories in here. So I wanted to spend this time talking about all the different theories of motivation, and the theories behind leadership, and try to give you some examples and how they're used within HR, because I think that will help with the comprehension. If you guys understand how we use these theories, then that'll help you on the test when you're given that situation. And so let's start off with, I've got these all marked here in the book. So, the book started talking about, human resources development, which includes training, succession planning, career development, performance management, all those things you think about in the talent management arena after a person's been hired, from hire up until they leave the organization. Everything in between is a lot of those HR development activities. And so the book started talking about how important culture is in the training arena, and how culture can affect training attitudes and training itself. And the first thing it mentioned, one of the first thing was Hofstede's value dimensions, which talked about power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and long-term versus short-term view. And as you read all those, you probably could see how some of these might impact culture, thus impact training. So, for example, looking at power distance, extent to which less powerful members of organizations accept that power is distributed unequally. In other words, there is a hierarchy. So if you think about that in a training sense, how would that play out? I know in my experience training different levels of line management, different levels of line management with line employees, sometimes there's not as much collaboration or collaboration discussion if there is management in the room as compared to if it's just line employees, because of the power and the perceived perception that if something said, that person might get in trouble. So those sort of things is what Hofstede's value dimensions were talking about. Uncertainty avoidance, extent to which people cope with anxiety by minimizing uncertainty. In a training environment, sometimes we are training things like strategy, or we're training change management. Well, all those things deal with uncertainty. And so if that produces anxiety amongst our attendees, then we have to be able to understand that and be able to work with that in our training environment. So those are just a few examples with Hofstede's. And then it goes on, as far as culture goes, it talks about low and high context cultures. In low context culture, communication is direct and structured. Higher value is placed on the words spoken than on nonverbal, and the behavior and beliefs are really spelled out explicitly. In other words, they're on the wall, they have plaques, they're on the website. So we all know cultures like that, where everything is, I guess, pretty much defined. And then high context, in contrast, would be communication is less clear, so more ambiguous. Meanings are derived from nonverbal communication, and face saving and tact are balanced with the need to communicate fully and frankly. So pretty much the opposite. And I don't know about you guys, but I've been involved in both. And, I would think some folks are more comfortable in the more structured environment, and some thrive in the more ambiguous environment. So culture matters. It's interesting. Just last night, I went to the Sherman Atlanta meeting, and the speaker talked about culture. And the week before, I had been at another presentation on culture, and it's such a powerful, powerful tool. Yes, it is a tool, and it can make for a definite competitive advantage for companies, but it's so critically important. If I walk away with two important concepts, is culture matters, not only to training, but in everything an organization does. And HR needs to be that change agent to build cultures that are deliberate. And so those two things I walked away with. That was not in your book. All right, so let's get into some other of the theories. So in general, before we get into these theories, we talk about OD interventions, and OD means organizational design. And so for many of you, I don't know if some of you have been in OD or not, but OD and HR have primarily worked together in areas of, organizational effectiveness, productivity, performance. But when you get into OD, there's some special tools and special theories that are used to look at efficiency, effectiveness, processes, workflow, things of like that in the organization. So one theory that is used is the systems theory. Peter Senge, Senge, had a book that outlines systems theory. It takes a very long time to read, but basically it's applied to OD interventions, and it's a quality movement, and it leads to process improvements. And based on the understanding between inputs, then there's process, and then there's outputs. And just thinking about in the HR arena, if you're thinking about systems theory with inputs, outputs, and processes, if you think about one of our processes that are pretty familiar to everybody, think about recruiting. So from a systems theory perspective, looking kind of holistically at the recruiting function, because that's an area where you can really gain some efficiencies, looking at, are we doing everything manually? Are we handling requisitions manually? And how many signatures do we need? And how many days does it take us to fill a requisition, and why? So all those sort of things, looking at process improvement. And I really feel that there's been a big push in the last few years due to the recession and other things that HR is really focused on looking internally at our own processes and trying to be more efficient, especially with technology being what it is in HR today. As you know, looking at our HRISs, our talent management system, what we're seeing is systems that are making us more efficient, because we are cutting down the number of systems that we deal with, because many of our vendors are aligning and getting married, and so now we don't need 6 or 7 systems anymore like we used to. So that's definitely changing as well. So let's continue and look at some tools then. When you're looking at OD interventions and you're looking at process and system theories, what are some tools that you could put in your HR toolkit that'll help you with analysis and data collections and things of that nature? So we talked a little bit about this in Module 1 when we were talking about some tools there with regression, correlation, some of the different graphing techniques. But if in your book, it did a really good job of looking at a process flow chart. So if you're looking at the recruiting process, for example, we talked about, and really digging deep to look at each task, to see, trace a requisition all the way through that new hire sitting in their seat. And so what are all those processes? What are all those tasks? Is there any duplication? Is there any redundancy? Is there any area to shorten that process to gain efficiency? And that's what a process flow chart will allow you to do. It's very visual. For me, I am very visual when it comes to processes. It's hard for me to keep it in my mind and on paper unless I see a chart. Now, there's many software packages that allows you to kind of sketch these out. Visio is one, we've used that. So process flow chart's a great tool. A control chart. So if you're looking at inputs or outputs rather, and you have an upper limit and a lower limit, and you're mapping production over time, and you're seeing some spikes up towards the upper limit and spikes towards our lower limit. There could be issues there. Is it an issue of manpower, something going on with the machines, something going on with a spike in order? Anyway, it just gives you a picture of that so that you can dig deeper. The cause and effect diagram, many of us use that. It's really, the more popular name is the fishbone. And so what it does is look at cause and effect. So there's some issue you're having, there's some problem that you're having, and the one in the book was, it was very good. It was assembly failure. So they were looking at what were the causes, and they kind of broke it down into people, material, the method, and the machine. And so they were looking at possible causes for each one of those. I encourage you to look at that. They're very, very helpful in brainstorming meetings when you're trying to figure out an issue in HR. Maybe you're trying to look at turnover. You know, what are the causes of turnover? And I can see a fish diagram looking at manager, work environment, task, maybe compensation and benefits, you know, those 4 areas. So those are very helpful to get you thinking and brainstorming into the root cause analysis, not just the symptoms, but we're really trying to get to root cause analysis. And then scatter diagram, we definitely talked about that in Module 1, and that's looking at 2 variables in their relationship. Remember that correlation, positive correlation, negative correlation. Correlation goes from -1 to +1, and the tighter the data points, or the little dots that represent the data, the tighter they are around the line from the X and Y axis, the more the relationship, the stronger the relationship. And so that's sometimes just a picture when you're looking at correlation. Maybe you're looking at education level and income level. You're looking at the line to see if the more education you have, do you really make more? So that would be an example. And then of course we have the overused histogram, just the chart that's in Excel with the bar chart is usually what we call it. We see those in every PowerPoint presentation ever known to man. And so I'm sure you guys use those on a daily basis to look at turnover or employee engagement or many, many other variables that we deal with in HR on a daily basis. And then an interesting one, the Pareto chart, that works on the principle that 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. And so the one in the book sort of laid out all the different causes with a certain, I believe it was errors with manufacturing, and you got unit leaks, wrong parts used, failed test, and those first 2 causes make up about 45%. So those would probably be a good place to start to try to problem solve in those areas to get rid of, you know, probably 80% of your issue. So that's the Pareto chart, and those are used a lot in manufacturing, I know. So Six Sigma is not really well, I guess it is a theory, but I'm pretty sure a lot of us are familiar with this. A lot of HR people have been Six Sigma certified, whether it's black belt, green belt, what have you. And basically it's just a data-driven methodology that you're looking at defects, and you must not produce more than 3.4 defects per million opportunities. That's not very many defects. And so Six Sigma was very, very popular in the 90s. I can remember a lot of our clients utilizing Six Sigma methodology, and obviously it came out of manufacturing, so looking at defects in manufacturing. But the cool thing is it came over into the service industry to look at processes. And so I think the methodology is very sound and very effective when you're looking at processes, looking at waste and redundancy, and which cause errors, or which could cause lapses in customer service, deadlines not being met, all that sort of thing. So that's Six Sigma. So I know I said I was going to talk about all theories, but I just wanted to throw in a little discussion regarding adult learning theory, because we are talking about human resource development and we're developing adults when we're talking about training, development, career pathing, succession planning, all those great things. And so I think it's worth to spend a minute on how adults learn, because obviously very different. Their needs are very different than other groups. So for adults, they want to focus on real world issues, something that they can apply really quick at work. So it needs to be really relevant. It, again, applies to their jobs. It has to meet their goals and expectations, allowing for debate and challenge within the learning environment. It encourages ideas and information, because every adult comes in the learning environment with their own knowledge, skills, and abilities, and so they love to share that. For the facilitator, sometimes that can be a little tricky, but adults have that expectation. With that, it allows them to become resources for each other, and typically the training will meet a current need that they can use on the job. Okay, let's see. I was just looking at the learning curves. In the book, it did a really good job of explaining decreasing returns, increasing returns, S-shaped curve, plateau curve, and it gave some great examples of those. And I think that's a great place for a question to come from, both in our module test and the real PHR or SPHR test. That's a good suspect for a question right there. But I do believe the book did a really good job on that, so make sure you understand that. And so the next one we're going to talk about is Bloom's taxonomy. And basically it talks about all the different levels of learning. And the book also gave a great example on the different levels and what happens at each level. But you start out with knowledge, and then you go up to comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and finally you're at evaluation. And that's the highest level of learning you can get to. So that's Bloom's taxonomy. So if you think about evaluation, you're making decisions, you can teach others, you can apply everything you've learned into a new situation. So think about a surgeon. That's probably where we want him to be. We want him to be at the very highest level of learning to be able to operate and make decisions really quick on an operating table. And let's kind of contrast that with somebody at a knowledge level, perhaps somebody at Chick-fil-A that has learned how to make the Chick-fil-A sandwich. It's the bun, it's the piece of fried chicken, it's 2 pickles and another bun. You know, pretty basic. They've learned how to do that. They've got the knowledge, the process, and the procedure in order to do that. So again, the book goes through each one of those in a very effective way, giving good examples at each step there. So now we're getting into some of the motivational techniques or motivational theories, and then we'll finish with the leadership theories. Now, I think all these are very, very, very interesting, but I know a lot of my past students have really struggled in this area. And so when we go through this today, and after you've read and tried to apply some of these theories, if you're still having trouble, please post a question in the forum, send me an email, because there's a really good chance that you'll be seeing at least one of these again in the context of a module test or the PHR, SPHR, because about 18 or 19% of the test questions will come from this module, depending if you're PHR or SPHR. So it's really important that you have a pretty good grasp on these theories. And so my motto is, if all else fails, just memorize, and again, the book does a pretty good job. But what I'd like to do is try to see how it applies in our everyday life as HR professionals, because I think if you know how it applies, it helps you to remember it and understand it when you have to come and take the test. So first off, I believe probably most of us has heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, And it's the triangle. I don't know if you can see this, but this is from your PowerPoint presentation. It's the triangle, and it's the pyramid. And at the very top, at the point, is self-actualization. Then we have esteem, belonging and love, safety and security, and our basic physiological needs. Now, obviously, there's how this affects you off the job, the Maslow's, and how it affects you on the job. So let's talk about off the job. So we want to be free from war and pollution. That makes us feel safe. We want to have belonging and love with our family and friends and our community groups. We, at the esteem level, we want the approval of our family and our friends and our community. And then at the very top, we want to participate in education. We want religion, personal growth. So when we get there, we feel like we've self-actualized. So let's go over to the work life and see how that manifests itself. So we'll start at the bottom again after our basic needs have been met. We've got safety and security, working conditions, employment security, pay and benefits. So you can see how when a company is going through a big change, they announce changes in strategy or changes in products and services, while people get nervous because it impacts this safety and security piece. Working up to belonging and love, think about that. On the one side, it's family, friends, and community. And this side, it's work groups, clients, coworkers, supervisors. So the same thing, just different groups. For your esteem at work, it comes from training, recognition, high status, increased responsibilities, and finally, self-actualization, opportunities for growth, development, problem solving, creativity. So you can see how as you move up this pyramid, how things that we do in HR can impact each area. Putting people in teams helps them with belonging and love. Training somebody, recognition helps with the esteem piece. And then when people are allowed to grow and develop and get a promotion, that helps with self-actualization. So very interesting. The next one we want to talk is Herzberg Motivational Hygiene Theory. Boy, that's a mouthful. So basically how I remember this is what you this is what motivates you both from an external perspective, extrinsic, and an internal perspective, intrinsic. So let's talk about external or extrinsic, and they call these hygiene factors. And that's things like pay, your working conditions, your coworkers, your supervisor. So those are all in your environment. So you can remember that. External, extrinsic, environment. Just remember all the E's. And then put that together with the intrinsic, internal, or how as I remember this, the things you bring with you to work. Those are things like achievement, recognition, personal growth. Those are your attitudes for these things. So those are intrinsic to you. And so personal growth helps with that. Your sense of achievement, your sense of recognition. So both your work environment and your intrinsic factors, put those together, and that impacts motivation. So it's extrinsic plus intrinsic equals motivation. So if one of those are off, guess what happens to motivation? That's right, that goes down. So you can see why, if you think about your engagement surveys, why they focus on things like coworkers and working conditions and pay and supervision. If you're growing, if you're developing, are you getting recognized? Are you achieving? And that's the reason it's built off this model right here. So hopefully that helps. Then we have McClelland's theory. It talks about high achievers. And his belief is that high achievers set moderately difficult but potentially achievable goals. They prefer to work on a problem rather than leave the outcome to chance. They seem to be more concerned with personal achievement than with the rewards of success. These are high achievers. They seek situations in which they get concrete feedback on how well they are doing with regard to their work. not to them personally, but to their work. So you ask yourself, why is this McClelland's high achiever theory important? Think about your high achievers at work. Those are the ones you typically don't want to lose, your high achievers, your high potentials, whatever you want to call them. And so this is, they're kind of wired with their DNA to be this way. And so, they want difficult goals. They they want to problem solve, and they are really concerned more with the personal achievement than they are with the rewards. In other words, they don't need all those attaboys and attagirls per se. What they look at as the end result. So that's McClelland's theory as it relates to high achievers, and I just remember those two go hand in hand, McClelland, high achievers. So you'll just have to find your own way to remember all these, because I know there's a lot in here. All right, then we've got McGregor's theory X and theory Y, and this is about managers and how much control they exert. So if you think about managers with a tight, rigid control, that's going to be a theory X, and you can tell that manager if a theory X manager believes that people do not like work. They try to avoid it. They feel like people have to be coerced and threatened with punishment to meet goals. They feel most workers like direction and avoid responsibility, and managers definitely operate from the authoritarian type style. Contrast that with Y, where people do not dislike work, they do not like controls. Under proper conditions, people do not try to avoid responsibility, and managers act as in a more cooperative, participative style. So that's the continuum X and Y. I will say today, I feel like most managers are on the kind of Y side of the scale or in the middle, because you can spot those X's a mile away, and they usually have issues with their teams for reasons that we talked about. So that's McGregor, X and Y theory. Then we have Varroom's expectancy theory, and this one is probably one that I can just spot a mile away, and it's typically when we're talking about compensation and in performance management, and I'm sure you guys have thought about this and now you have a name for it. So it talks about the level of effort an individual is going to exert. So think about your own self, for example. And my decision to exert effort in the workplace is going to be based on three things. One is expectancy. How likely is it that I will reach my performance goal? So that's why setting goals that are SMART goals are so important, because if you give me a goal to, I don't know, sell $5 million in the next quarter, that's going to be demotivating for me, because usually, maybe that takes a whole year to do. So you've got to set reasonable goals that are attainable, the SMART goal theory. So that's expectancy. Then we have instrumentality. Will I receive various outcomes if I reach my performance goals? Will I get X if I receive that goal? And valence is, how desirable is X? So if I get X, say it's a bonus, how desirable is it? Or if I get a trip, if I win a trip, if I exceed sales, do I value that trip, or would I rather have a day off, or whatever it is? So expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. If you think about it, that's how we design our performance management system, compensation systems, using these type of criteria. So hopefully that made that a little bit easier. And then we have Adams' equity theory. It's basically the way it sounds, so there's not too much memorization with Adams. It's based on the fact that people want to be treated fairly. Inputs, education, experience, seniority equals the outcome should be equal, pay, status, and benefits. And tension exists when similar inputs do not equal similar outcomes. And if that is known by employees, what happens? If they see that there is an imbalance in this equation, guess what happens to their effort? That's right, it goes down. And so I will tell you that of all the all the theories and everything we talk about as far as motivation in the workplace, I believe that the expectation of fairness is huge, because I think employees can spot a mile away if they're not being treated fairly. So we've got to make sure, when we get to compensation, we'll be talking about looking at internal equity and external equity as far as pay goes. We'll be talking about that. But fairness, the way people are paid, the way people are treated, promoted, trained, all that sort of thing, needs to have a huge fairness lens over it. So because employees, that's one way to lose tons of points in the motivation arena. All right. So again, those were, we forgot somebody, Skinner. Skinner's behavioral reinforcement theory. When I think of Skinner, I think of just the disciplinary process. That's what I think about. Talks about positive reinforcement. Person repeats desired behaviors to get a desired result. Think about your kids. Negative reinforcement. Person works to avoid undesirable circumstances. Punishment. Response causes something negative to occur. You're late 4 times, so now you're going to get your first written warning. Extinction, unlearning undesired behavior because of no response or reinforcement. So that is Skinner. And so how do we apply all these that we've talked about? They're the basis for looking at work environment. Remember, we talked about intrinsic and extrinsic factors. Talked about goal setting. Talked about that with Vroom, making sure that the goals were attainable. Looking at rewards, looking at pay for performance. So we use these all the time. We just may not have known what to call them. Now we have a name for them. Okay, so that is all our motivational theories, and I hope you find those as interesting as I do. Probably not. All right, so I want to finish up our this week's discussion with a few more theories, if that wasn't enough. Just now we'll want to talk about leadership theories, because I feel like leadership development right now is at the forefront of priority right now. I feel like a lot of HR professionals and even line managers and even the C-suite are really focused on this right now, because of the issue of bench strength and the issue of the talent shortage we're going to be facing in the next 5 to 10 years when the boomers finish retiring and there's not enough folks to take all those places, and the skill gap and all those things we've been talking about. So leadership development has come kind of, forefront now, and so I think it's real important that we understand how important it is in our organization and what the basic principles are when it comes to leadership development. So let's talk about a few of the theories. There's not too many. Most theories are around how we handle management, how we manage people, I guess. So Blake Mooton's theory talks about the concern for production is on one axis, and the concern for people is on the other axis, and it looks at those different quadrants and gives the kind of management style a name. And so if you've got a great deal of concern for production and you also have concern for people, or people are important as well, then you're a team leader, because you're equal on both. So that's a good place to be, a team leader. You're very concerned about the work that has to be done, but you also want your team to be collaborating and high performing and all of that. So what if we have low concern for task and high concern for people? They call that the country club manager. I've always thought that was so funny. And that's because everybody's happy, but not much is getting done. And so we probably need to coach that manager more on the task side, setting some pretty rigid goals and objectives to get him to move over more to pay attention on the task. Because, it's great that our people are happy and glad to be there and he's concerned, but we've got to get things done, right? So what if we have low concern for people, low concern for task? What we have there is the impoverished manager. He needs to be coached on all areas, both task and both people. And, maybe, I don't know that we would hire many people like that. Maybe we do, or maybe we promote people that were great technically, and then we promote them and they become not as effective managers. But that's a hard area to coach back into because we're working on both areas, people and tasks, simultaneously, so it's hard to do. And then we've got high concern for task and low concern for people. There's a lot of folks out there, and that's called the authoritarian manager. We talked about a little bit about that in X and Y theory. So that one's tough because, those taskmasters getting things done, and they get a lot of things done, but they leave bodies behind. That's not good either. So they have to be coached on the kind of the IQ or the emotional intelligence piece of it to really have that relationship with the team and communicate more with the team, get the team on board, and knowing that the people side of the equation is just as important as the task, because after a while, people are going to get a little tired of that taskmaster stuff, and production's not going to sustain and probably take a dip. So that's Blake Newton's. Very, very interesting, and I'm sure you guys have known some of all of those managers, and has had to maybe have a situation to where you've had to coach one of those managers. The next one is probably, I would think, one of the more popular theories of management or leadership. Is called Hershey-Blanchard's theory, and the most common name for this is situational leadership. And I will say that probably I lean towards this in my style. I will tell you that I've been pretty authoritarian in the past, but thank goodness I've gone through some great leadership development and realized that. So I try to be more situational now. And so I know it's hard because we don't have a visual, but it was this one here that was in your book, and it was also on slide number 3-71. So there's four quadrants that we're going to look at, and we're looking at task behavior, and then we're looking at relationship behavior. And so if you're in a selling type of situation, which means you've got high task and you're high on the relationship, then you can explain decisions, provide opportunity for clarification. So you're really just acting more as a coach in that situation. Then in the telling situation, you've got high task, low relationship. You have to provide specific instructions. You have to closely supervise performance because of the issue on low relationship. We talked about that before because, the task may be getting done for a while, but the issues become performance over time. And then you have low relationship, low task. That's more delegating, turnover responsibility for decisions and implementation because of that issue. And that definitely cannot sustain itself. That situation has to be taken care of. Either the person has to be developed or unfortunately replaced, because that's not a good team situation at all. And then in participating, we've got high on relationship behavior, low on task again. Remember, that's kind of our country club area. Maybe share ideas, facilitating decision making, trying to get action around some of those things. So that's Hershey-Blanchard's, and looking at each situation and trying to lead accordingly. And then our next one is, I always say his name wrong, I'm pretty sure it's Fiedler, contingency theory. And he's saying that the favorableness of leadership is determined by three factors. One is, what is the leader-member relations, the degree of trust that the employees have for the leader. And we all know that's true. Because if there's low trust in an organization, it doesn't matter what that leader says. Task structure, the extent to which tasks are defined. Again, remember we talked about ambiguity and clearly defined task. I would definitely err on the side of clearly defined task. I would find that not most, but a lot of employees feel better when tasks are clearly defined. Position power, the degree of power and influence a leader has over subordinates. So obviously, the leadership environment is definitely impacted by those three things. So that's Fiedler. And so that takes care of all the different theories. Now, I didn't cover every single thing in the book in this module. It did go into a performance management discussion. I felt like it was very straightforward with the different errors in performance appraisal, the different types of appraisals. Again, if you have any questions on those, please post a question in the forum. We are having conference calls every about 4 during this term, and so there's plenty of times for question. No questions, a dumb question. So again, thank you for your time, and I'll be talking to you guys very soon.